Death's Door was released in July of 2021 by the two-man team of Acid Nerve on Steam and Xbox platforms. It'll be released later this month on Nintendo and PlayStation consoles. It is a follow-up to Nerve's last game, Titan Souls, a boss rush game released in 2015. Much of the DNA of Death's Door comes from that, with a healthy dose of Zelda and Dark Souls. It's an extremely solid action-adventure game with a carefully tuned difficulty curve. There are a few missteps along the way, but the blend of combat, puzzles, and exploration makes for a wholly satisfying experience. Spoilers will be abundant. The game begins in a black and white environment showing us the building blocks. The player is a crow, working at an organization of reapers who claim the souls of various beings who have lived too long, and is treated like any other 9-to-5, with a bus into work, passing through a metal detector, and various other crows typing away on endless reports. See Dead Like Me for another take on this style of reaping. This offers a few key insights. The first is the humor of the game. Right out of the gate, there is a satirical element to the proceedings. A crow begs for souls, a lazy security officer lets you by with your glowing red sword, and your supervisor offers a deadly warning about the amount of paperwork he'll have to do if the player dies. The situational humor works, where things are played straight and the comedy comes from the absurd situations. Other examples include Pothead offering you soup. On the other hand, a lot of the humorous dialogue isn't. Steadhone, the gravedigger, is a prominent character. He curses his own immortality after the player takes their best shots at him, and he is unmoved. His first lines are quite funny. The sardonic immortal is a classic trope after all, Marvin being the most iconic, but he returns after every boss and quips about their life. There are other characters that also serve as fools. Adding him to the roster just diminishes the impact of what should be in triumphant moments tinged with sadness, but a player might find themselves thrown out and realize they're playing a video game, written by a human. That is the opposite of what you want. After the task is given, a door is dropped in, a portal to another place. These are the fast travel points of the game, and work well thematically, and their history in the story is interesting. The game always began with a door, though its function shifted. The original idea for the game was the player visiting all these different places through a single door, but we quickly came to realize the challenges with that from a development perspective, which led to the hub world being full of doors. After exiting the door, the player is greeted with a new, greenish environment. Though it is colorful compared to grayscale, it barely compares to some of the later landscapes. Here the player learns the basics of the combat systems. The primary inspirations are clear here, with Zelda shouting loud and clear, though it's a mixture of the 2D and 3D types of games. Rolling around is the quickest way to move. Like a mad acrobat, a player will tumble through both large levels and combat encounters using the generous invincibility frames afforded to them by the roll. In terms of movement, that is all there is until the last third of the game, when the player acquires a hookshot. Once they get that, it does shake things up quite a bit and turn combat into a deadly ballet, and the timing puzzles that were once fairly dreary become another part of the dance. The second part of the system, of course, is the attacks. A player has a basic slash, coming out quickly and with little room for enemies to punish. This can be chained into a multi-hit combo, with different weapons offering different chain lengths. There is also a strong attack, that hits slower but harder, and can be charged into a significant blow. However, that is much easier said than done. Enemies are very mobile and quick to strike, so waiting around for 2 or so seconds to get one good attack is often worse than a quick combo, or a slice and roll. The damage is simply not worth the time or the risk. A final melee option is the dash attack, performed by a strong attack at the end of a roll. This can be difficult to use at first. It puts the crow into a long animation, and the end damage arc is fairly small. Initially it seems of similar use to a charged attack, little to none. With practice, however, it is one of the most efficient, doubly so on bosses. It requires proper spacing and a certain knowledge of how quickly enemies attack, but it ends up a good tool in the box, offering movement and damage. Then there are the ranged options, manifested as spells. There are a multitude of potential options to restrict these: mana bars, limited ammunition, or cooldowns. Death's Door opts for none of these, but instead a deceivingly clever charge system. A player begins with 4 charges, up to 6 after acquiring all upgrades, and each use of a spell uses a charge. Attacking, either enemies or designated destructible debris, get back one of these. This gets rid of the run and hide to regain mana, or spamming ranged weapons that can reduce combat to a time game, and instead forces melee interaction. Inspiration for the mechanic is found in both Acid Nerve's previous game, Titan Souls, wherein the player only had a single arrow and had to retrieve it carefully each time it was fired, or in Doom 2016, or ammunition health could be found by performing glory kills on weakened enemies, forcing the player to get in close to reap the rewards. The player begins the game with one option, a bow and arrow. This does good damage and fires quickly. It is also used in a fair number of nuzzles, and occasionally puzzles. There is some hidden gameplay that is tutorialized when necessary for progression, but it can also be learned in earlier encounters. Arrows can be set on fire with the pits dotted around the levels. It's a bit strange given their force arrows, but some allowances have to be made. This can assist in early fights, and is later required in the Witch's Estate and Ceramic Manor. Another example of this is reflecting projectiles with a weapon swing. Although it's never strictly required, it is almost assuredly going to happen. When a player learns this, it will often be a light bulb moment, something that transforms any future combats with projectile foes. Whereas before, a player would impotently wait for the floating wizrobes to come close enough, now they are not wasting time, but waiting to pounce. So after discovering how to combine arrows with fire to set things alight, the next spell a player is given is the fire spell. It's the same, but different. It takes a bit longer to charge, but travels through enemies, making it adept at clearing out swarms. The final offensive spell is the bomb. It takes the longest time to charge, but offers the most damage, and in an area after hitting its target. Largely it is the weakest, as the charge-up time is even longer than the melee attack, and it will most of the time result in the player being damaged, either by enemies or their own bomb exploding too close. All of these spells have upgrades, found hidden throughout the world. After a difficult fight with a Flameskull Arbiter, a player is granted faster-firing arrows, flames that induce burning, no damage from self-bombs, or a dashing attack with the hookshot. In addition, the icon is colored on the UI. A player begins their adventure with 4 health points, up to 6 after acquiring all upgrades. These are very precious resources, and easy to lose. Everything in the game does 1 damage, from the mightiest blows to a bite from a bat. And after a player takes damage, the invincibility period is always slightly shorter than expected, which can lead to a cascade of damage. In addition, in most combats, there is no way to heal. The only way to heal is finding a green pot, there are 50 in the game, and planting a seed in it. This allows a player to heal from full, but then it's used up. When a player dies, they are shown an imposing death screen and shunted back to the last door they entered from. This is also part of the best visual joke in the game. After dying, all enemies are reincarnated, but any puzzle elements or arenas defeated stay fulfilled. This also refreshes all the healing plants in a level. This is crucial to the overall level design, a central conceit to an otherwise extremely punishing mechanic. There are also 4.5 melee weapons that can be acquired throughout the game. The starting sword, a pair of daggers, a lightning hammer, and a large greatsword. The half is an umbrella that can be found at the beginning of the game, which is only used for challenge runs, as it is the sword, but half the damage. Still impressive for a parasol, however. Each of the others is found in one of the 3 main areas of the game. They don't offer unique experiences, but are additional options at little cost. The addition of weapons actually came later in the development cycle, just to allow people to have more freedom of expression as they play the game. Like if someone just wants to spam attacks, they can play with the daggers, or if they just want to get a massive fucking sword and just hit stuff with that, they can. The environmental design of Death's Door is fascinating. The levels themselves are practically a straight line with regards to actual choices a player makes, but it's extremely well hidden. The first level, the Lost Cemetery, seems almost like an MC Escher painting with how the various elevations twist and turn, all in pursuit of a lever that was practically right in front of the player. In addition, due to the potentially devastating nature of death, a number of shortcuts are required. After most significant fights or puzzles, a player is given a lever that creates a ladder or opens a door or otherwise offers a shortcut. In the forest level, a player makes their own, using explosive plants to destroy ruined walls in a way that gives agency to them, and this makes the process feel more natural and builds a greater understanding of the level geometry. This is very important as there is no map, no mini-map or maxi-map or overall view of any kind. It's certainly a surprise the first time a player pushes their back button or peruses the menu looking for some guidance. Initially it seems like a strange idea, perhaps even a poorly thought out one. What it does is ask something of the player that is very rarely needed: spatial awareness on a greater level. After dying, it begs the question, how do I get back to where I was? Most of the time the answer is easier than expected, due to the previously mentioned shortcuts. Even with no map, it's hard to get lost, as the way forward is never more than a few steps away. There are also a number of collectibles scattered off the main path. There are masses of soul energy, life seeds that power the healing plants, giant shrines that offer pieces of heart or magic, or shiny things, a useless trinket that offers some backstory to the world or specific characters, These are mostly found via taking the wrong path, breaking boxes, or in a bizarre Super Mario Sunshine reference, hopping down sewer pipes. Occasionally a puzzle will be required to get these, but most of the time it's simply exploration. There are a few clever ones, the most notable hidden in the reflections of a marble floor. These are worth collecting and offer a pleasant diversion from the combat. After completing the game, the doors in the main hub gain a red hue if not everything is collected in that area. In addition, there are several NPCs who offer hints at missing objects. And then finally, by hitting a large bell, the world switches from day to night, dampening the music and reducing the enemy numbers while allowing for a few special interactions. Overall, this makes the final collectibles hunt enjoyable, even without a map or explicit numbers. There are two main types of levels in the game: exploration zones and dungeons. The more open areas have significantly more secrets, and thus feel less linear in design. They're also structured in a more looping fashion, with the frequent shortcuts allowing for more avenues to move around. The dungeons, on the other hand, are structured around a single central area, and the player has to collect 4 lost Reaper souls and return them to a greater door. There are 3 types of puzzles: nuzzles, timing, and environmental, ranked approximately by frequency. Nuzzles, or not puzzles, make up the bulk of the non-combat encounters in dungeons. The term itself is harsh, but also true. First we have to ask, what is a puzzle? Well, dictionary.com defines it as a toy, problem, or other contrivance designed to amuse by presenting difficulties to be solved by ingenuity or patient effort. The key word here is difficulties. If there's a flaming pit, a non-flaming pit, and a closed door, there's no challenge. They're not meant to be head-scratchers. Instead, they serve to reflect on the atmosphere, to take a break from the stress of combat, and to set up the basics of challenges for the future. In many cases, a nuzzle is actually better than a true puzzle, as the traditional kind can lead to frustration, anxiety, and at worst case, giving up entirely. There's maybe a single moment where a player may be confounded by a puzzle. The second kind of puzzle are timing ones. A player is required to hit switches while avoiding a variety of obstacles, or light fires before they go out. This requires a few moments of foresight, but the penalty for failure is either a point of damage or a bit of time. These are often enjoyable, and most offer an optimized solution that speeds up the process significantly, allowing for replays of the game to demonstrate aptitude. Third and final kind are environmental, and could be compared to a hidden object game, looking for the cracks in walls, the backsides of buildings, or the shine of a precious life petal. These are more frequent in the open areas, and are by far the most interesting to find. They almost always give that aha moment that developers strive for. The structure of the game balances these two aspects, intermixing them so there's a solid stew of combat, puzzle solving, and bosses. They're divided up into 3 main areas: the Cauldron Witch's Domain, the Frog's Flooded Fortress, and the Abandoned Keep. In addition, there are 2 bosses to begin and end the game, bringing a grand total of 7. Combat requires enemies to fight, and there are a good variety introduced at sufficiently regular intervals. The most basic of enemies, goblins, come in a few different colors and appearances. The first the player sees aren't even hostile, just lost souls wandering the cemetery. Next they encounter an aggressive variety, then faster, ones that jump, and a combination of all. This is the main template enemy. The second are Wizrobes. That's the Zelda name, but the comparisons are, well, inarguable. The basic type never goes away, but there are green explosive mini-bosses and a single fire variant that shows up in an Avarice fight. These fights, of which there are 3 throughout the game, are quite a surprise. After a long dungeon, a player encounters a great horned door and is transported to the realm of crows. Up a pedestal, an enormous treasure chest sits, inspired by the greatest of boss key chests. After an elaborate opening ritual, it slams down, tombstone teeth chomping at the bit. A lolling tongue taunts the swallowed player, and they descend into darkness. What follows is a standard 4-wave enemy encounter, though there is limited light offered by a central keyhole. In some cases, enemies will hide completely in the darkness, but this is infrequent and quickly resolved by the aggressive AI behavior. Interestingly enough, it is the chest itself that's called Avarice, or Greed. All 3 are the same layout. There's no diversion in music, color, or name. Still, each serves as a solid midpoint to their respective areas, testing the limit of the player's combat ability with 20 or so enemies in quick succession. These are the hardest non-boss encounters in the game. The struggle makes the reward greater, and each reward is a new magic, allowing for fundamental change in exploration and combat. They are not the only reward from combat though, as every enemy slain gives the player souls. Most give 1 or 2, with large enemies offering up to 10 or 50, and bosses 100. These can be exchanged with the bank clerk for one of 4 categories of upgrades: strength, attack speed, dodging, or magic. Each is useful in its own way, and there is a noticeable improvement with each purchase. Even with 100% completion, a player won't be able to purchase everything. This means there are actual choices with progression, different from most games in the last few years, which are wont to give the player everything. There are around 15 types of enemies. Some of them are spread throughout the various open areas in the game, before and after dungeons. These are all optional, and after a player dies, they're often rolled past to avoid potential damage, or simply for time efficiency. The rest are in arenas, where after reaching a certain trigger, locked doors appear, and a player is forced to fight to the death. Some of these are large, open plains, where others are tight corridors or icy fields. The combat never grows old. Despite there being only a few basic attacks, the variety in foes, environments, and difficulty ensures it's fresh throughout. The challenge is somewhere between Dark Souls and Zelda, hitting a happy medium. There are definite spikes and dips, and the curve gradually trends up, but there's never a wall. Even in the worst case scenario, only a few minutes of progress are lost, ensuring that death never hurts the player's enjoyment. The health system also leads to the most intense moments, where a player has to finish off the last enemy with only a sliver of health. Assisting with this is that there are no enemy health bars in the game. Instead, glowing red cracks gradually spread across an enemy until there's nothing left. This means that a player never quite knows exactly how much damage a foe can take, and has to take calculated risks. These drive the ebb and flow of combat, as the player will dive in, not knowing if their combo will exactly finish off a dangerous enemy, or leave themselves vulnerable. There are 7 bosses in the game, each introduced with a suitably epic title card, excluding the frog, which goes for a cheap joke. The first enemy the player fights in the game is the demonic forest spirit, an imposing figure that serves more as an introduction to dodging and the combat mechanics. Next is the Guardian of the Door, a gigantic living castle which has a number of projectile attacks. This is the boss that shows off damage the best, and is an excellent capstone for the first open area. This boss was also not a planned design. One of the first bosses you fight in the world is not something that we had discussed or asked for. It was just something that Frizz had drawn. It was called Thunker or something like that, and it was this big cathedral with legs, and we were like, that's cool, we should make that and put it in the game. And he was like, yeah, okay, I'll just tidy up the sketch and get it in. It was the most complicated model ever, but we got that, and it's such a cool, interesting looking boss. Then we have one of the 3 story bosses, the Witch of Urns, or Granny. She is built up both in the story and in the design of not only the area she abides in, but almost all the enemies you faced on the way to her. She also, like all story bosses, teaches one of the advanced techniques of the game, bullet reflection. If a player had not encountered the mechanic before, they are almost forced to here, with the sheer number of projectiles that fly out. There is also a secret tip to fighting the boss here, via throwing fire magic into her pot as she spins around. This does some damage and offers a significant opportunity to wail away on the stunned foe. The next boss is the Frog King, and one that was actually originally intended for Nerve's previous game, Titan Souls. Giant frogs are a surprisingly common trope, originally drawn from Japanese folklore. It's the easiest boss in the game, as well as having a quick kill similar to the Witch, but with explosives instead of fire. The actual design of the fight is fine, and the lesson it wants the player to learn in positioning via a floor that is constantly falling apart, but it never quite comes together, as the player can fire an arrow with a generous window to reset the destruction. The frog talks a big game beforehand, appearing to this player several times, but is ultimately a bit of a letdown. The third major boss appears with less fanfare and is a yeti named Betty, hidden up in the Frosty Mountains. There's no dungeon built around her, but rather an abandoned fortress, guarded by failing watchtowers. It can be a jump in difficulty. She moves fast and punishes button mashing far more than any previous enemy. To this end, the game encourages finding the window, or in other words, greed is not good. Most of the time when a player takes damage, it's because they tried to get one more attack off, or tried to finish their combo when the enemy is clearly ready for it. Betty rolls over these kinds of players. With practice, however, she becomes the second best boss in the game, rewarding careful play and mastery of the systems. Before it was said that spoilers would be unmarked, but this is an actual spoiler. Darth Vader is Luke's father, so continue only if you're sure you want to know everything. After conquering 3 bosses across the world, the player is finally able to open the titular Death's Door. Inside, there is nothing. A blank whiteness. The player's whole quest was for a soul, but there is nothing but death. He casually explains that all souls that pass through here are recycled back into the world. The thing that your ally, the large raven, had been after for centuries is impossible, and that fact drives him to madness. It's stated previously that if anything lives too long, it has ill effects. So in a tragic betrayal, the player is forced to fight their mentor and quest giver. A player stands a monster before them, and they have to decide whether they can really take this old crow's life. The fight is the best of the game, Boss Onan. First we have the music, The Grey Crow. Much of the music throughout the game is solid, some memorable, but this stands head and shoulders above the rest. It's high intensity but still melodic. It's simple and deliberate. Take a listen. The battlefield is an infinite stretch of white, with any hit the player takes dotting it with a splot of red. It borrows some mechanics from previous fights, but adds a few completely new ones, and the most visually striking element is every time the crow is hit, an inky black head floats out, seeking the player. They can be attacked, causing them to glow pink, a sharp contrast to the gray scale that is the rest of the fight. As the bird grows weakened, it gains new attacks, sending out paper birds that are clearly akin to those from Spirited Away, or summoning a black hole that draws all surrounding matter into it. These can be combated with quick shots from fire or a bow, respectively, encouraging a player to use all their tools. The old crow grows more rabid in his attacks, striking like a charging bull. Finally, the player will strike the last hit, and he collapses. The screen fades to white, and the normal feeling of satisfaction is replaced with one of doubt and regret. Death mourns with you. This is not the final fight of the game, however, for there is one who is responsible for all of this, the Lord of Doors. His music is suitably orchestral, offering a grand scope as expected from a final boss. The actual fight, however, is unfortunately average. Throughout the first stage, the player duels him across various areas from the game, but in each his basic attack remains the same: jump and slam the ground. Sometimes quicker, sometimes slower, but always the same. In the different areas, he gains a single different attack, and it feels so textbook. It's a final exam boss, and so it includes an attack from each previous encounter. It's not bad. The difficulty is definitely there for the final challenge, and the scope is there, but it's the heart that's missing. The problem is the Raven was such a poignant, well-executed, and effective design that whatever came after would naturally fail in comparison. There's no helping it, so much so that I think it may have been better to end without killing the Lord of Doors. Maybe it sets up for a sequel, or maybe the main character simply has to figure out how to live in the world. They say to end the game on a high note, and I can think of no higher note than the Grey Crow fight. Of course, that is musing about what could have been, and not what is. And the Lord of Doors has a significant place in the story, and serves an important function as a classic end boss. With Zelda as an inspiration, it was inevitable, and it's not the wrong choice, but one that could have been different. Magic spells all have relevant uses in this fight, and offer alternative ways to deal damage, but none are required, which is better than some of the archetypal big bads. Ultimately, it is a solid boss, and a good way to end the game, but it does feel just shy of perfection. Bosses all share a common trait in that they've all lived for too long, and this has impacted them in a negative way. This helps our process because we can think from different angles about how their personalities have changed and how they now have a negative impact on the world at this point. The visuals for Death's Door are extremely effective. The textures aren't the highest definition, or most advanced technically, but it makes up for it with style. There are definite inspirations from various Ghibli films, most notably Castle in the Sky, Spirited Away, and Princess Mononoke. It's not wholesale, though. There is a unique twist in all of it. Though the team at Acid Nerve is only 2 people, they hired external artists to assist them. There were several concept artists and a single full-time modeler. To ensure consistency, they developed an internal art bible, and were luckily able to find others who understood their vision, and were able to put it to page. Overall, the game just looks nice. The effects for weapons and enemies all deliver suitable punches, and there's a lot of juice in almost all the animations. The environments are never flashy, but do the job, and help immerse the player in the world. Lonely is a word to describe much of the environments. It always feels like there was something missing, and that good days are long past, and the future may never arrive. The sound design is equally effective, with meaty thonks for all attacks, and unique cries from the enemies throughout the game. The music was mentioned before, but there are a few pieces that are outstanding, and all done by David Finn, one of the main duo. The plot of the game is centered around death. It's the main character's job, after all. Killing is routine. Souls need to be collected by reapers, who happen to be crows. This has begun sometime, centuries ago. The Lord of Doors came to Death with a deal. Death would no longer have to collect souls, as they would create a door for the souls that lead to somewhere. It automated the process, and all they asked for was eternity. He said that was impossible, but offered greatly extended life. The deal was made and continued for generations, each lord living for their allotted life, then passing on. Of course, one day, a lord, the current one, decided it was unfair to have to die, so he sealed the door and death behind it, and thus the current situation was created, where nothing naturally dies, and instead reapers are forced to go and collect those who have reached their given time. So that's why the world is the way it is. With no natural death in the cycle, life stagnates, and so does the world. you can't fight death. To that end, the player doesn't. Death is a friendly character who became depressed due to a soul-sucking job. A relatable situation. Each of the bosses seeks to avoid death in their own ways. Grandma feels she can hide from death with her pots, giving virtual immortality at the cost of humanity. She even transfigured her own grandson in a desperate attempt to flee the Reaper. Pothead, his name a joke, but in the end he is a character defined by a choice he didn't make, to avoid an inevitable consequence. It's a tragic tale, but in the end the moon can't outrun the sunrise, and death comes for her. The Frog King lives in an imagined world. He believes himself invulnerable through a formidable army, strong armor, and imposing walls. Ultimately, though, his forces are little more than shadows, souls to collect. His armor falls apart, and his fortress is flooded and crumbling. With all his pontificating, he is little more than a scared, lonely creature. At least in his death, though, he looks peaceful, something he was never able to achieve in life. Betty is the most mysterious of the three. She never speaks, and to understand her is to look to Titan souls and its progeny, Shadow of the Colossus. Both feature enormous beasts of unknowable origin and power. They're killed by the main character for a singular goal, and the consequences of their deaths don't matter. Betty is similar. She is reaped because a giant soul is needed. She's not evil or deserving of it, but it's required of the story and so required of the player. Then we come to the poor Grey Crow, just one more lonely soul, put out of a misery enforced by a broken system. There was never any winning, for the soul he was trying to claim ceased to exist the moment he tried to catch it. This is all revealed in the true ending of the game. After acquiring all of the collectibles, the player is able to meet the truth, a godlike being inspired by Old Testament angels. It is then revealed that he was assigned the task of reaping the soul of the protagonist of Titan Souls. When that was impossible, because he'd gone through Death's Door, that's when the events of the game were set up. So Death's Door is not as standalone as it appears. It's in fact a stealth sequel to Titan Souls. This is a rarity in games, but it makes absolute sense when looking at the game that directly inspired this franchise. The entire plot of Titan Souls could be described as Shadow of the Colossus, but with more ambiguity. But there's more. The actual world of Titan Souls and the world of Death's Door are the same environment. The map structure is the same. There are a few key points that you can use as anchors to see the structure of the world. Where the Frog King is King Ohanen's cathedral from the first game. It's set a long time after, but the core is the same. Not only are the games linked by environments and characters, but also theme. Even in success, there is sadness. That is the motif of both games. All the killing and violence, is it all worth it? Everything has a cost, and there are said to be two sureties in life, death and taxes. The theme of death was something that I could use as a tool to explore. Death's Door is an excellent game. It features extremely solid combat, interesting exploration, and a cast of memorable characters. The design of the game echoes the best parts of Zelda and Dark Souls, while still carving its own niche and developing a compact and satisfying experience. There are a few missteps in the humor and boss designs, but overall it maintains an incredible experience. 4.5 stars. Please like and subscribe, and visit my Patreon if you'd like. Have a wonderful day.